Thank you for joining us today. My name is Susan Evans, and I am honored to welcome you to today's webinar with the Alzheimer's Association, Lewy Body Foundation, and Parkinson's Foundation. I have a deep respect for each of these organizations. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 12 years ago. Overnight, I went from being a daughter to a caregiver for my father, concerned about the progression of his disease, and my dear mother, who had lost her partner in life and was literally half widowed. In 2015, we made the decision to move my father into a senior living community. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The guilt was overwhelming. Caring for my father at home was becoming too much for my mother, and I did not want to lose both my parents to Alzheimer's disease. Our family chose Kensington Senior Living because of their expertise and commitment to dedicated memory care. It was the hardest yet best decision we made. The team at Kensington took exceptional care of my father and mother for over 7.5 years. I am one of the 30 million caregivers in the country, and I applaud the work that our caregiver experts are doing to support caregivers everywhere. Thank you, Kensington, for supporting and sponsoring their efforts through educational webinars. It is a lonely disease riddled with guilt for the caregivers. A copy of today's webinar will be delivered into your inbox with links to connect you to these wonderful organizations. Please share the webinar with friends and family. Please ask questions in the Q&A function as we get to the end of the program, and we will also get to questions submitted at registration. Please join me in welcoming Claire, Keith, and Donna. And before we get going, I have an interesting fact that Dr. Fritz Lewy discovered Lewy body while studying Parkinson's at the Alzheimer's laboratory in Munich, Germany in 1912. It's a small world. Can we please start with Claire?
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan, so much for hosting us today. And it is my pleasure to be here with all of you today and be joined by such esteemed colleagues throughout the dementia space. And I'm just going to share my slides really quickly here, just to give you a little piece about the Alzheimer's Association. I am honored that I got to celebrate my 23rd anniversary with the Alzheimer's Association just last week. I've been able to really live our mission, which is really leading the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction, early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. And we do that because this is an unsung need for family caregivers to really be supported throughout education, and support services. The Alzheimer's Association offers free online and in-person education programs for people living with the disease and their caregivers. And Susan, thank you for sharing your personal story, because I think for us, that's how it all begins, is with that personal story of someone who wasn't able to get support or who needed it in a time of need. And we know that Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, which you'll hear a lot about understanding the differences today with our program, are on the rise. And we need to be there to support families, and families need to know where to reach out for help. We are also, if there's one thing you remember that we do, the Alzheimer's Association has a 24-hour helpline, 1-800-272-3900. And it is a lot of times that first step for families to get connected and to really ask those difficult questions. And sometimes it's just asking the question, where do I begin? This is such an overwhelming topic for families, and really not knowing where to begin, how to understand what's the difference between Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. What does that even mean? Why is it important? And then once you figure that out, finding those free educational and support services like educational programs, understanding the disease, understanding how to be a better caregiver or learn those skills building classes, as well as support groups. Because I think the reality of this disease is that until you've walked in the shoes of a caregiver or a person living with dementia, you really don't understand. And we hear from families all the time that it becomes really hard and challenging for them because their friends don't really understand anymore. And building a connection of support services and through things like support groups is a great way to do that. We have a number of online tools for those tech-savvy caregivers and people with dementia to help find those resources, to find local support, to be able to get connected to people, other people living with the disease, and their caregivers. But I think importantly, it's also a great thing to think about how to live well with, oh, my slides have taken over a mind of their own. Live well with dementia through services and support services for people living with the disease, and really to be connected. So happy to be with all of you. Happy for the Alzheimer's Association to be with these two other wonderful organizations, and through Susan and Kensington, and really grateful for the time today. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back to you.
I just want to emphasize one thing. I've known the Alzheimer's, I've known Claire for many, many years, and you have been so incredibly helpful for educating the community, and all of your caregiver services are just phenomenal. And I loved what you said about connecting the community, and also really helping people that are struggling with this diagnosis. And this goes for Lewy body and for Parkinson's, to take the stigma out of the disease, because I don't know why, but we got to get the stigma out of brain disease. I did an event with people that actually have Alzheimer's, they're authors, and they all said that when they were diagnosed and they were going through the struggle, and I'm sure it's the same with Parkinson's and Lewy body, their circle of friends shrunk. And so if all of our organizations can help take the stigma away from brain disease, I think the world's going to be a better place for all those 30 million caregivers as well.
Totally
Go
agree.
ahead, Keith.
Thank you. And here, let me just agree with that. That is true. Stigma is absolutely something that we need to fight, and we can fight. And I think we're already making strides in that area, and that just needs to continue. So I'm just going to introduce you briefly here to the Lewy Body Dementia Association. And I think the first thing that I'll say is, just sort of clarify, what our umbrella is, right? Because you're hearing today about Alzheimer's, you're hearing about Parkinson's disease, you're hearing about Lewy body, and there's actually a lot of overlap in these various conditions. And so we actually connect with each other in many ways. For Lewy body dementia, we're specifically interested in and working on behalf of people who are having cognitive impairment because of an underlying Lewy body disease. And that might be Parkinson's disease. So some people with Parkinson's disease will develop something called Parkinson's disease dementia, and that is a form of Lewy body dementia. There's another form of Lewy body dementia, though, that sounds very similar, but actually has a different meaning, called dementia with Lewy bodies. And those are folks who they have a very similar underlying brain disease, the Lewy body disease, that causes both Parkinson's and DLB, but they are not having movement problems yet. And so those folks are considered to have DLB, or dementia with Lewy bodies. But we're here for both groups. Some of the things that we offer for patients and caregivers are educational resources. We have lots of free publications that you can order straight from online, and those are both for people living with Lewy, for their caregivers and family members, and also for physicians and other healthcare providers. And so you can order those things, like I said, from our website. You can enroll in the Lewy Learning Center if you're interested in really taking a deeper dive as well. In case there are any clinicians or physicians or other healthcare providers on the webinar with us today, I did want to point out two pieces of professional education as well. And one of them is focused around something called the Diamond Lewy Management Kit. And this was originally developed in the United Kingdom, but we have translated it, for lack of a better word, to the United States healthcare system, which differs in many ways from the healthcare system in the United Kingdom. So this has been made useful for people in the United States, and it's all about how to manage the various different symptom domains that people with Lewy body dementia experience. If you're an allied healthcare provider, we also have medical education for you. And so one example of that is this program that we have actually on continued.com. And this is Lewy Body Dementia, the role of the physical therapist, occupational therapist, and speech language pathologist. It sounds like I need a speech language pathologist to get through the slide. In-person centered care. One of the things that people are very interested in that we make available is something called Spark. And so many of you may know that Robin Williams actually passed away with Lewy body disease, and unfortunately was not diagnosed during his life, but was diagnosed based on a brain autopsy actually after he passed away, sadly. And so we offer essentially, this is kind of a condensed version of a longer movie about his life that we've been given permission by his estate to utilize for raising awareness and educating people about Lewy body dementia. This is available on Mediflix.com, free of charge. Anyone can watch anytime. And it's actually the most highly watched video on Mediflix. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go check that out. I think it's about a half an hour long. Also for video content, mostly for the community, but also some for healthcare providers. You can find us on YouTube at LBDA TV. If you need support, we also have a telephone line that you can call. Now, this is not 24/7, but call us and leave us a phone number or leave us a message, and we're going to get back to you within 1 day. That's our commitment to you. Finally, I'll mention we have some research. Well, this is my second to last slide here. We have research centers of excellence. And these are, although we call them research centers of excellence, one of the criteria to become a research center of excellence is that you must provide world-class care. So I would encourage you to go to our website, take a look for research centers of excellence. And if you happen to live near one of these, you're going to get really high quality diagnosis and care at these centers. And the final thing I'll mention just briefly is a program called Lewy Trial Tracker. This is a way that you can sign up to receive updates about new clinical trials in Lewy body dementia that are launching that may match with your interests. So you tell us a little bit about the kind of studies that you're interested in learning about, whether you're interested in drug studies versus non-drug studies, for example, and then we send you information based on your interests when new studies that match those criteria are launched. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and thank you very much for your time and attention.
That's amazing. And I just will add in here that if you ever, to the audience, have an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, it's not only rewarding, but it's so good for the entire disease community, because without clinical trials, we can't better, our treatment of these horrible brain diseases. And I just want to send a quick reminder to the audience that no need to take notes. You will receive a copy of the webinar so that you can review the slides. You can take notes at that point, screenshots if you want, to be able to access information. And you'll also receive links in the email to get you right to the resources. Go ahead, Donna, please join us.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna get my slides up here, a couple of slides to share. So actually, Keith, I'm really thankful that you mentioned just briefly the differences between the different kinds of dementias. And when we think about Parkinson's disease, I think most people think about the movement symptoms of Parkinson's, those more visible symptoms. But the fact is, Parkinson's is also a disease of non-movement symptoms. And so people experience things like thinking changes, they experience depression and sleep problems and much more. And so those symptoms are often just as disabling and troubling for people with Parkinson's as, the movement symptoms are. So I appreciate you kind of bringing that up, that there are other symptoms related to Parkinson's. So the Parkinson's Foundation, this is kind of just a quick overview of some of the things that we do, but we really work to ensure that people with Parkinson's have access to quality Parkinson's care. We support research that leads to breakthroughs in treatments and ultimately a cure, we hope. And we inform and support people with Parkinson's and their families with resources, education, and emotional assistance. So whether people are newly diagnosed, whether they're looking for a PD specialist, or they just need a support network, which is so important, we're here to help them. So just really quickly, a few of our resources. So this is just some pictures here of some of the resources that we provide. And if anybody out there has their phone in front of them and they want to scan, this will get them right to where they need to go to order some of our resources. But just kind of generally, we provide information for understanding Parkinson's and for living well. So we offer education programs, both online and in person across the country. We maintain a broad library of print and digital resources for people to access. And of course, our helpline, which is staffed with amazing and knowledgeable information specialists. So people can call and ask questions about Parkinson's. They can ask, look for support. If they need just somebody to talk to, care partners can call and ask questions. So it's really a great resource for people. As far as our commitment to quality care, we designate centers of excellence and comprehensive care centers. These centers provide the most up-to-date care and treatments for Parkinson's, and our centers of excellence are also conducting ongoing Parkinson's research. In addition, we also provide professional education through our online learning lab. We offer team trainings for teams across the country who are treating people with Parkinson's, so that they can have, be versed in the best quality of care for people with Parkinson's. And then we are also working to reach out to community neurologists and help to share information about our resources and just Parkinson's in general. We also offer many opportunities for people to engage with the community and to support our mission. So if people, want to become a Parkinson's Foundation ambassador and help to work in their communities to share information, there's opportunities for them. Also through our various community events like our moving days, our in-person education events. And people can also become involved as advocates for research or policies that help to support various Parkinson's disease initiatives. I'm trying to stop sharing my slide. Oops. Sorry.
Well, computers
There
always
it
do.
is. It's the two monitors, they always get me.
I was so surprised to hear, and we can talk about this in our next conversation about scientific advances, but Parkinson's is the #1 neurological disease right now. And I just don't know why, and I don't have the answer. I don't know if any of you do, but why are these neurological diseases just on the rise? It seems like they've overtaken all other diseases, or is it just that there's more attention to it? I don't know, but we can certainly talk about that. Let's go ahead and talk about scientific advances. And why don't we go ahead and start again with Claire with the Alzheimer's Association.
Yeah, absolutely. And I made a decision, and I know that Keith will be okay with this, and Donna, I'm hoping you will be too. I just added in a slide to start here as we start to think about understanding Alzheimer's, because Keith, you did such a great job is my slide showing correctly?
No.
No. What's happened here? Is it showing how about now? Nope.
Not yet.
Oh my goodness.
Not going anywhere. Don't worry about it. Take your time.
I don't know what happened.
Oh, there you go.
How about now? Is it showing correctly now? Woo! All right, there you go. I had the tech issue for all of us. So I added this slide in because Keith, you did such a great job. I think this question is so common to really understand, and you can see here, and of course Parkinson's, we should put that on that slide. I didn't have time to add it, Donna, but really thinking of that umbrella term, that's what we're talking about with really understanding the differences between all of these types of diseases, it's the biology is different, and the cognition changes and some of the other symptoms may be the same as the disease progresses and we start to see these cognitive changes. To give you a little bit of an idea of what you see under the microscope of Alzheimer's disease, well, this is what we now know to be those hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. It's that buildup of amyloid plaque in the brain that sort of creates these deposits around the brain that stop our cells from doing the things that they're supposed to do. And this buildup of a protein called tau that sort of is like a transport system within your brain that essentially gets off its track. If you think of like a railroad track and then gets off of its track, the train doesn't move, right? The same thing that happens with this tau protein. It sort of stops the systems from doing what they're supposed to be doing. But what you see here is really that atrophy, that shrinking of the brain that causes that loss of function, this function that's enough severity that it impacts our ability to do our activities of daily living, things like bathing and dressing and going to the grocery store, managing our finances. So to just a little level setting here, as we start to then think about what's new in the world when it comes to Alzheimer's disease in particular. And one of the things that Keith taught me all about many years ago that I'm most excited about when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and the progression of science is this sort of focus on really understanding a biomarker or a biological marker. It's a piece of you that shows evidence of disease. And biomarkers in the realm of Alzheimer's disease are really starting to change the game. And when we think about other biomarkers that you might be familiar with, things like if you've ever had a blood test to see what your cholesterol level is, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And where we've really seen advances in the last few years is around PET imaging, where we can see these PET scans that now show us that amyloid and those tau tangles, as well as some blood biomarkers. And the blood biomarkers in particular are really exciting because we're closer than ever to really understanding how we could use these in clinical practice. It's important to know that we cannot use them today in clinical practice, but we do have a cerebral spinal fluid test that's approved by the FDA. However, I would not say that's exactly least invasive, but for the emerging blood tests, we're getting a little bit closer to actually having them validated enough where you would be able to have that single test that could identify the evidence of Alzheimer's disease in someone. And when you think about how it's replicable in all communities compared to more fancy or more expensive tests like a PET scan, it's really exciting to see. At our Alzheimer's Association International Conference last year, we saw the results of a couple of these blood tests. One was really exciting because it actually showed a finger prick test where they were actually able to dry the samples and ship them between two countries, and the results held up. And the other compared a blood test to a PET scan to a physician's diagnosis, and were considered to be 80% accurate, which is really exciting. We're also seeing some progression in the realms of effective treatment. And I know this next slide is going to be really busy. So that's Dr. Alois Alzheimer. He's that gentleman that first discovered those hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, the plaques and tangles. We know that there have been medications here that have really been functioning or treating symptoms, not necessarily changing the underlying biology of the disease. But just in the last few years, we've seen some real advancements in seeing symptom medications for insomnia actually being treated in the Alzheimer's disease population. We've seen remarkable progress with the monoclonal antibodies, which are infusions that actually can potentially have impact on slowing disease progression for the first time. And then another medication that was tested in the Alzheimer's disease population to show some support in treating the symptoms of agitation. Now, these monoclonal antibodies are the ones that you might have heard in the news. They're the ones that are starting to potentially have impact on changing cognition, function, and behavior. There are 2 that are approved by the FDA today. And we also have a third one that's under FDA review called donanemab. Donanemab works a little bit differently than some of the other monoclonal antibodies because it's actually, there's a predetermined level of amyloid clearing with those potential drugs, with that treatment, excuse me. And so there's the potential that these medications might actually be able to be stopped after a certain amount of time, 12 or 18 months, which is incredibly exciting. Now, that one's still under FDA review, so we don't really know the outcome of that one yet. But what's important is these are treatments specific for Alzheimer's disease. And so it's very important to really understand that difference in the biology changes in the brain. And that's why it's so great that we have this opportunity to talk about these things together, and not just one type of dementia. Really quickly, I just want to talk a little bit about risk reduction, because it is so important that in the meantime, we think about the things that we can do to decrease our risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And it's all the things no one wants to talk about, like eating right and exercise and staying cognitively and socially active. But we're also seeing research focus on things like gut health, and the importance of good gut health, and the importance of things like cutting down some of those things that are high in fat, and those what we call the losing my words, ultra processed foods. And I'm going to stop sharing because I know I'm completely over on my time. But the Alzheimer's Association is working really hard to look at some of these risk reduction things, as well as the medications that actually treat the disease as well.
I think that that's so important. I have a question about the drugs, why they have to have these names that no one can pronounce. Why can't it just be simple syllable names?
I wish we all had the answer to that one.
Maybe we could come up with little nicknames for them. And I know it's true for Alzheimer's. I'm not 100% sure about Lewy body and Parkinson's, but the gentleman I interviewed, Dr. Daniel Gibbs, he is actually a neurologist in Oregon, and he has Alzheimer's. And he said that when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he knew he had certain symptoms, and he knew, he's a neurologist, and so he was diagnosed. And he said that he immediately did the lifestyle that you talked about, the diet, the exercise, worried about his sleep and staying stimulated. And he is convinced that it has slowed the progression of his disease. Is that the same with Lewy body and Parkinson's?
So I don't know that. So actually, I'll take the Lewy body if that's okay. So I don't know that we have the same level of evidence yet in Lewy body dementia, but I think a lot of those studies that a lot of those studies that look at dementia risk and lifestyle are really looking at what they call all-cause dementia. So that means they're not necessarily looking specifically at one particular brain disease as much as they're looking at, what Claire referred to, that clinical syndrome or collection of clinical symptoms that we call dementia. And certainly, there does appear to be benefit there. Similarly, when I spoke to a neurologist a couple of years ago about this, he said, when I have my meetings with my patients, they always want to spend the bulk of the time talking about what they're interested in, which is the pill. But then I always want to end with talking about what I'm really interested in, and I think it's going to be really effective, which is lifestyle changes. So even neurologists who love to write prescriptions understand the power of lifestyle. Now it's a numbers game. You're moving your risk up and down, so you can't necessarily say I will certainly prevent dementia with lifestyle changes, but I definitely recommend it.
And I think it's going to be a huge piece of moving forward. Sorry, Donna, I didn't mean to step on you there.
No, if you want to, did you finish your thought?
Yeah,
I think
it's just going to be a huge piece of it. It's not an or, it's an and, right? We're going to do all of these things, and we might have an effective treatment that addresses the underlying biology. I think that's the only way we're going to solve dementia.
Yeah. I was just gonna say lifestyle. I mean, it's so important, at least in Parkinson's, lifestyle is so important for controlling those symptoms. So whether it's diet, whether it's exercise, it's something that, you know, I think every movement disorder specialist, every doctor who's treating somebody with Parkinson's is gonna tell them, like, you need to stay moving, you need to stay active, you need to eat well. So certainly I think that carries across through to Parkinson's as well.
Okay, Dr. Keith, you ready?
I am, thank you. So, I'm going to actually, before I have a couple of slides here, but I actually just want to piggyback on something that Claire said, which is the excitement around these new drugs for Alzheimer's disease. And that's an excitement that is shared by anyone who is interested in or working on dementia. And part of the reason for that is because there is this overlap, you know, between the biologies of the diseases. This is going to surprise some of you probably, but people who have Alzheimer's disease, if you look at their brains after they pass away, about 50% of them actually also have Lewy bodies in their brain. And that's the hallmark pathology, both for Parkinson's disease and for Lewy body dementia. And so there seems to be this really close connection there. The converse is also true. If you follow people who have dementia with Lewy bodies, I'm not sure about the Parkinson's disease dementia for this one, but if you follow people who have dementia with Lewy bodies and you look at their brains after they pass away, somewhere between 50 to 80% of them also have the plaques and tangles that Claire talked about, the Alzheimer's disease. So many people with DLB probably also are going to find some usefulness from these medications. But let me be clear on that. The medications can only be prescribed for people who do have the hallmark pathology of Alzheimer's. So you can't, if just having DLB or just having PD may not necessarily mean that these medications will work for you. But if you also have that Alzheimer's pathology in your brain, you may be a good candidate for one of these medications. And that's more people. Yeah, and then I'm going to share my screen here. And you heard Susan say earlier about, and this slide is crazy busy, so I'm just going to speak to a couple of points on it. And really, this is to drive home what Susan said earlier about Dr. Alzheimer and Dr. Lewy. This is actually a photograph from Dr. Alzheimer's laboratory in 1912 with some of the folks that he was working with on his team. And this is Dr. Alzheimer, and this is Fritz Lewy. So even if you go back 110 years, there were connections between these diseases, and they're biological connections. And that's the piece that I really want to drive home for you if I can, that we tend to think, and this probably gets to the stigma as well, we tend to think, many of us publicly tend to think of dementia and cognitive impairment as being quote unquote in your mind. And that's not true. These are diseases of the brain. They are in your brain, not in your mind. And so if you're feeling stigma, or if you have someone in your family who has one of these diseases, please understand that if there's, you know, behavior that's not good, like, you know, sometimes aggressive behavior, or even violent behavior, it's not because they want that. It's because there's a disease of the brain that's really driving that. But let me just step back to the slide here. So Claire was showing you pictures of the plaques and tangles, and similarly in Lewy body diseases, you have another kind of pathology, and this is called Lewy bodies when they've have filled up an entire brain cell like this. And well, they don't always fill up the entire brain cell, but you see an inclusion in the brain cell. That's called a Lewy body. And you can also sometimes see that pathology in the projections that these brain cells make. We call those axons or dendrites. And if you refer to them together, they're called neurites. And so this is a picture of a Lewy body, and these are what we call Lewy neurites. And that's really where the disease gains its name. Now, what I'm showing you on the right here, this is way too much to unpack, and it is actually focused here on Parkinson's disease rather than DLB. But these are some recent results actually showing a new biomarker now for Lewy body pathology in the brain. So in some ways, if you have, Lewy body and you've been sort of watching Alzheimer's and how it's developed and, these lovely PET scans and the CSF tests and the blood tests and, maybe having some science envy, I'm here to tell you that the scientists are catching up. And we now have, for the first time, an in-life biomarker to be able to tell who has Lewy bodies in their brain without waiting until they get to autopsy. And it appears the science is still being done. So these are not, your average primary care physician is probably not going to prescribe one of these for you yet. And frankly, a neurologist is probably not going to prescribe one yet, because right now they're mostly useful in research, although they do get some clinical use. One of the things that we're seeing in research is that they actually predict later conversion to Parkinson's disease or dementia with Lewy body. So you can, in some ways, maybe even find out who's in the earliest stages before they've even developed any dementia symptoms. And that's exciting to me, because that means there's a window of opportunity to intervene therapeutically so that people may never develop those symptoms in the first place. I'll use myself just as a super quick example. I'm on a statin, and that's because I have very high cholesterol and have since I was in my 20s. It's probably a genetic thing. But the point is, there was a biomarker for me, which was they could measure my cholesterol levels. Now I'm on the statin to keep those cholesterol levels down, and that's to prevent me from having a heart attack or a stroke. Similarly, we can see and envision a future in which people are tested long before they're of the age to develop dementia to see who has these amyloid plaques and tau tangles that represent Alzheimer's pathology, and who has the Lewy body disease in their brain. And these are folks who may then be on the path to developing Parkinson's disease or DLB. And like me, maybe they take a brain stat, right? And never have that bad clinical outcome. That's the vision for the future. Two super quick slides here. Just wanted to let you know about two clinical trials that are happening for potentially disease-modifying medications in people with DLB. One of these is called the SHIMMER study, and this is a trial of a medication that has one of these goofy names again. It's CT1812, and the other one is a study called REWIND. And this is a study of, oh my goodness, I'm just seeing we have a little error there in the slide. I apologize for that. But this is a study of another drug with a crazy name called neflamapimod. Say that 3 times fast. And that is also in folks for DLB. I'm going to leave it there because those, to me, are the most exciting things happening in LBD research today, which is the advent of new biomarkers so we can tell during life who has the pathology, and then the fact that there are now clinical trials occurring for people with DLB as well.
So again, these clinical trials, everyone, share this video with everybody you know, because it can only advance, helping with some treatments for these diseases and hopefully some type of a cure and antidote. I love your vision about the statin, and wouldn't that be marvelous for everybody? The world would be such a nicer place, really, without all these brain diseases. And I do want to point out the slide that you showed in 1912. There was a woman in there. One woman. Oh, two women.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that was good. I saw one and I was trying to find the other. Okay, that's great. Go ahead, Donna, please.
All right, I'll be quick, and I don't have any slices of brain slides or anything like that. So before I share, I have just a couple of slides to share. I just want to make sure everybody knows that there is still a lot we don't know about Parkinson's. We really don't know what causes it. And so there's important research that's happening every day. And research in Parkinson's is really focused around better treatments. It's focused around slowing progression, hopefully finding a cure. But we're also just looking for better ways to understand the biology of Parkinson's. And so, oops, I muted myself. I just want to share about an initiative at the Parkinson's Foundation that we're super proud of. We're really excited about, and that's our PD Generation initiative, which was started in 2019. And I'll just start here with this slide, which I just always think is so cute, but the little fingerprint. But I think it's important for everybody to know that with Parkinson's, everyone's journey is very unique. So not everyone has the same symptoms. Not everyone's symptoms progress at the same rate. Even their response to medications and treatments is very different. So from a drug discovery standpoint, that makes PD really difficult to treat and also to cure. So genetics serves as a key to helping us understand the biology of Parkinson's disease. And so think of genetics as like that fingerprint. So by collecting the fingerprint of every person with Parkinson's, we can start to overlay that fingerprint one on top of the other and find commonly dysregulated pathways. And our goal here is to ultimately be able to restore those pathways back to a healthy state. So that's that fingerprint. But genetic testing with Parkinson's isn't currently part of regular care for people with PD. And so that's why we started the PD Generation Initiative, or PD Gene as we like to call it for short. So the Parkinson's Foundation launched PD Gene. It's a multi-center research study. It offers genetic testing for clinically relevant genes. So there's 7 genes that we test for, as well as genetic counseling at no cost for people with a confirmed Parkinson's disease diagnosis. I just want to flag that the genetic counseling piece is very unique to this study. It's really important that when people are getting a genetic test, that they're also having those results explained to them, understanding the implications for them and for their family members, and what that means for their care. So the genetic counseling piece is a really important piece of this initiative. PD Gene offers the most comprehensive clinical genetic test for genes related to Parkinson's. And really our objective here is twofold. And the first is to collect and share Parkinson's disease genetic information from people with Parkinson's. And the second, and probably the most important, is to really help us improve our understanding of Parkinson's so that we can help participants as well as their clinicians and their loved ones understand their genetic status, so they can improve the quality of their care. It helps to guide decision-making regarding care, knowing what their genetic status is. And it also helps to determine their eligibility for clinical trial participation, because a lot of medication trials are targeted towards specific genes. So if people know what their genetic status is, it can help to funnel people into studies where before, time is being wasted looking for people who might be eligible for those studies. So our initial recruitment goal with PD Gene was 15,000 individuals. And we're just shy of that goal. So that's about 18 months earlier than we expected. And so we're now hoping to go beyond that goal by the end of the year and reach 20,000 people with Parkinson's and obtaining their genetic information. So this study really serves as a critical role in the success of PD clinical trials. And what we want to see is really tying the community to the PD community together, clinicians, people with Parkinson's, researchers, through PD Gene, and then lead us to potentially a successful phase 3 clinical trial. And so even though our goal is 20,000, we are going to continue testing people as long as there is a need for it in the PD community. And just recently, I'm really excited to share, we received a grant through, it's called ASAP, so it's Aligning Science Across Parkinson's. This grant is going to allow us to significantly accelerate the testing that we're doing and hopefully accelerate that by like 3-fold. And there's also a focus on groups that have been traditionally underrepresented in research. So I don't know about Alzheimer's and Lewy body, but research has always been, white males. And so the goal here is to really diversify, the individuals that we're able to test with Parkinson's. And that's going to help us know more about Parkinson's for everybody. So really excited about the next steps in PD Gene. So I will stop there.
Parkinson's, I don't know, we have a lot of questions that are coming in about Parkinson's and the difference and maybe the symptoms and a difference between these three dimensions under the umbrella that Claire shared with us. But Parkinson's just appears to me to be a little more complicated with its symptoms, because it masks itself so different in people that have a diagnosis with Parkinson's. So it's a little more complicated, I suspect.
It is, and I'll say, you know, we are fortunate. There are a lot of really effective treatments for particularly the movement symptoms. And so if people can have those symptoms better managed when they're also dealing with these other daily challenges of things like whether it's cognitive changes, dementia, or, you know, even sleep problems or depression, that helps just kind of that daily, you know, managing of the challenges significantly.
And there's a question, I'll just keep going here with you. If my parent has PD, do I have to wait to have a diagnosis of PD to participate in a trial?
It's for, well, no, there are clinical trials available for people who don't have Parkinson's. So with any, and you know, Keith, Claire, you can share, with any kind of research, they also need that control group, right? So they need the people that aren't affected. So certainly people can participate in Parkinson's research if they don't have Parkinson's disease. We just have to find those trials that are looking for that. PD generation in particular is for people who have a diagnosis of Parkinson's.
And I'm going to move over to my left here with Keith and Claire. A couple people, audience members, are asking really about the differences in these three different dementias, symptoms, and kind of longevity or lifespan, or just kind of some basic differences in, you know, symptoms and some of the things you experience.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there if that's okay. Claire, are you good with that?
Take
Okay.
it, Dr. Fargo.
Okay, great, thanks. So, you know, they have some similarities, right? So all of them lead to dementia. And when we say dementia, we're really talking about a loss of cognitive ability. We say, and specifically we mean a loss that's that's bad enough that it interferes with your ability to take care of what we call your activities of daily living. So things like once it begins to interfere with your ability to bathe yourself, dress yourself, manage your own medications, do your own grocery shopping, etc., then that's when we would say this cognitive impairment is now dementia. However, there are different forms of dementia and there are different kinds of cognitive abilities. So one of the things that we see, for example, in comparison with Alzheimer's disease is that, and I'm speaking in broad generalities here, everyone's different, but with Alzheimer's disease, it's more likely to affect memory. So what has occurred recently? What did you have for breakfast this morning, right? Forgetting someone's name that you just met, but maybe being able to remember someone from very early in your life. That kind of memory loss that's associated with dementia is more likely to be Alzheimer's, although you can see it in Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia as well. In Lewy body dementia, you may be more likely to see things like executive function, which is things like decision making, judgment. Okay, those are typically more affected in LBD and less so memory. So you may have very good memory until very late in life, but still have other cognitive challenges that are bad enough to be called dementia. It's a little bit more difficult to differentiate, I think, Parkinson's disease and LBD, particularly because LBD, Lewy body dementia, includes both DLB and Parkinson's disease dementia. So if you have Parkinson's disease dementia, you really have one thing with a couple of different names, right? You've got Parkinson's disease that's progressed far enough to give you dementia. You can also call that Lewy body dementia. The difference is that in Parkinson's disease dementia, you already have a movement disorder. At least that's the way we define things. And these definitions can be a little bit controversial, actually. So sometimes it depends on who you ask. But the way we define things is if you have the movement disorder first, and then you develop dementia, we would call that Parkinson's disease dementia. And if you have the dementia first, most people with dementia with Lewy bodies will go on to develop a movement syndrome as well. It may not be as full blown as what you would diagnose as Parkinson's disease, but it can look very similar. So the difference there is that the dementia happens before you develop the movement disorders. We would call that DLB. I hope that's helpful. I know it was generalities, but those are some broad differences and comparisons.
Well, thank goodness we have you three working on this for us, because it really is very confusing. There's so many similarities, but the differences are broad. Claire, do you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to add, and I think, first of all, it's why it's taken over 100 years to really even begin to scrape the surface on trying to understand. And Donna said something about when she first started, she said, listen, we're learning every day. And that is true, I think, for all three of us in the work that we do, is that we know what we know today. We know what's happening maybe in the brain. We don't know the why for everybody. And I think that's what can make it so challenging. And we're talking about diseases that impact the brain. And so everybody's brains are different. And I think it just... I say that only to sort of normalize the frustration that I think caregivers and people who have these early symptoms experience, where they feel like they don't know what's going on. It's why the stigma is there. It's why it's taken us so long. It's why now we're starting to see work in health systems to really understand a little bit differently of how these diseases differ and why we need to pay attention to that. Because 20 years ago, we would have just called it dementia and called it a day. And we really can't do that anymore. And you can see here, there's so much changing and emerging science that we need to be able to truly understand it, which means the diagnostics and health systems need to catch up as well.
Well, I hope every day that they can. Questions coming in now about the three diseases we're talking about here and the difference between them and vascular dementia. Do you want to start with that, Keith?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So vascular dementia really refers, there are different causes of dementia. Broadly speaking, what we're talking about today are really what we would call neurodegenerative causes of dementia, meaning that these diseases all are associated with the loss of brain cells due to some underlying disease process in the brain, whether it be plaques and tangles for Alzheimer's, or synuclein, which is what makes up Lewy bodies in Parkinson's disease and DLB. A whole other cause of dementia is vascular burden. So these are when you have little micro strokes or little tiny hemorrhages in the brain. So this is all based on your blood supply. And when your blood supply to the brain starts to have trouble, then of course your brain is not going to function as well as it used to. And when that gets bad enough that you again have this dementia syndrome that interferes with your daily living, that's called vascular dementia. And one of the things that's interesting too in this working in dementia is that we want to put a label and say this person has vascular, or that person has Alzheimer's, or that person has Parkinson's, whatever it might be. The reality is, by the time that we're old enough to begin to develop dementia, most of us have more than one of these pathologies happening in the brain. So most people, and very commonly what you'll see is vascular changes plus Alzheimer's related changes, right? And it can be difficult then to disentangle which one's really causing the symptoms, and should we treat this person as a vascular dementia patient or as an Alzheimer's disease patient, because they have a little bit of both, right? And so it can get really tricky. That's the way I look at it.
Anybody have anything to add to that? Okay, so this is a good one for, I think, both Donna and Claire. Is movement disorder associated with Alzheimer's?
you want to take that one, Donna? Okay. So, I mean, well, I'd be interested to hear if I answer it correctly. So typically it's not a common symptom that we see with Alzheimer's. We see the memory changes, we see behavior and mood changes. We don't typically see those movement disorder changes that with a true Alzheimer's patient. Like Keith just said, there's oftentimes more than one pathology going on. Donna, I don't know how you would have answered that question.
Probably the same. I think it's important for people to know when we talk about movement disorders are diseases that affect people's ability to control or manage movement. So they may have uncontrollable movements, and that's why it's called a movement disorder. Most movement disorders do also have non-motor symptoms and non-movement symptoms that go along with them. So that's not uncommon to have some of those other things as well. So even though we call them movement disorders, they're typically much broader.
And you may see in a patient with later stage Alzheimer's disease, difficulty with increased falls, with, more of even a shuffled gait at some points, but it's really more about their ability to sort of retain their brain's ability to retain the information on how to do those things, as opposed to an actual change in their brain that's causing the movement disorder.
And I have our last question here, but before I ask the last question, I just want to thank the audience. Your comments are really heartfelt, that you're just loving the topic and you're so glad that we shared this information with you. So I'm so happy about that. So thank you. But this question is kind of for everybody. Claire, you can chime in there, but it really is. How aggressive is Parkinson's disease compared to Lewy body?
I don't, and I have to be honest, I'm not familiar with progression with Lewy body. And I can answer for Parkinson's that it's different for everybody, right? So some people can have Parkinson's and it progresses very quickly. Other people, it's much longer. We call it a marathon disease because that's really what it is. People can live 20, 30 years with it and have really good quality of life. Other people, if they're diagnosed later, or depending on what type of Parkinson's they have, they may progress more quickly. So it's really, hard to say.
Yeah, and if I could just add on top of that, I would agree that everyone is different. And so you can't look at sort of, at the point of diagnosis and say, we know how quickly you're going to progress. We just can't do that on an individual level. And then there are also some cases where people sort of last much longer than average, right? So we think with, for example, with Parkinson's disease, we tend to think about Michael J. Fox, right? He's had Parkinson's disease for decades now. Most people with Parkinson's disease do not have it for decades. And, we saw that with ALS as well as Stephen Hawking. He lasted much, much longer than the average person with ALS. So it really is an individualized kind of thing. That being said, we can look at group averages, but these are group averages only. And most of the research on Parkinson's and dementia with Lewy bodies is that at a group average level, DLB tends to be more aggressive. And so people do have a faster cognitive decline if they have DLB versus PDD, which is where the movement comes first, and then you get the cognitive issues later. And also, unfortunately, the lifespan is a little bit shorter as well. So it does seem to be, again, at a group average level, DLB seems to be a little bit more aggressive.
How does that compare with Alzheimer's, Claire, if you could help?
Yeah, I mean, it's all very similar. And I think one of the challenges that you have, we have averages as well, right? It's sort of 8 to 12 years is the average length of the disease. I think a lot of things play into it, right? One is the actual acknowledgement of understanding of the symptoms to when you're actually diagnosed. I think the other piece that I would imagine impact these other diseases as well is other things that could be a health issue for a patient. So, you know, if you have other cardiovascular risk factors, or you have other health issues that play into maybe the length of the disease, or your ability to maybe have that longevity. And I think social determinants of health play a big part in some of this. You know, Keith, when you were mentioning Michael J. Fox, when I was thinking of Alzheimer's, I immediately thought of President Reagan, who lasted well beyond the average year. He probably had round-the-clock Secret Service, all the best care. That absolutely plays into the longevity too, is what kind of level of care and that you have for all of those other medical issues as well. So we have to talk about social determinants of health when we talk about these neurological diseases as well, because it absolutely plays into access to care, access to diagnosis, and it will play into access to treatment.
You know, that's why it's so important that all of you that are here today offer free access to support services for all the caregivers out there. I think that is so critical to support everyone, no matter where they are. And I even think most of you have international access. So I can't thank you enough. I can't thank our audience enough. Thank you for all the positive feedback in the Q&A. And please support these organizations, because without your support and all of our support, they can't function and give us all the free support that we get for caregivers. But thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you guys again, and look forward to the webinar in your inbox. And thank you so much, and be safe, and have a nice evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Paul.